ain't a podcast that's flyer. You are now tuned in to direct Misfire. Bensome, Huw, and Sellick. Tell everyone to tune in. Let's roll the dice. Let me show you what we doing. A fantasy war game. Play it smart and you win. What you know about the crystal pen and the retribution? Hero, giants and knights galore. It's an adventure. This is Kings of War. Let's go.
The Sylvan Kin, the Fae, inhabit the most magical parts of the forest, among the fairies and nymphs that dwell there, and they are a rare sight to behold. They are a capricious and elusive people, deeply suspicious of most other beings, even distrusting their fellow elves. They are one with nature.
Hello champs, and welcome once again to another direct Misfire Army review. Joining me today, as always, is Sellick.
Hey all.
And Huw.
Yo!
As we analyse and dissect the Sylvan Kin Army list. So pull up a seat, grab a drink, and let's get into it. Okay, it's been a long time since our previous army review. Hopefully this one's not too bad. It looks interesting for anyone who's interested. It shouldn't take too long either. Because it's a fairly concise list. But before we get into any of the units, we'll start off with the upgrade that some of them can take. We'll just explain that now so we don't have to do it later. And that's the Deathroot arrows. So basically you pay for this upgrade and then that unit once per game can burn it or use it. And they can reroll up to 3 dice that have a natural 1 to damage. So it's like vicious, but not very good.
Yeah, it was sort of one use vicious, basically, because, I mean, how many ones are you going to roll in any given roll a shooting unit hit situation anyway, right? Like,
yeah,
3 feels like about the max anyway. Like, maybe there's a world where you roll like 5 ones on a single 6 dice roll or something like that, and then this is worse than vicious, but...
Depends. I mean, if you spoon, that's...
The rest of the time it's just basically vicious for one single roll. I think it's pretty bad. Yeah, it's 5 points on any unit that can take it, I think. And very few units can take it, surprisingly. But it is, it's the kind of thing that you might throw 5 points on at the end of your list because you have 5 points left. But generally it's pretty bad. And one of the reasons it's bad is that very few units... In fact, I don't think any of the units that have access to it have any piercing. So at least on base. So you're wounding on sort of, let's say 4+, maybe 3+ at best to do your damage. So the value of a reroll is modified a bit by how likely it is to succeed when you do said reroll. So if you're rerolling 2s to wound, that's a very valuable reroll. Like if you're rerolling 1s to wound and you're 2+ to wound.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Or you're rerolling 1s to damage, perhaps I should say, and you're 2+ to damage. Then your reroll is very likely to result in an additional wound. But if you're doing like 5+ to damage and you're rerolling 1s, yeah, you're basically spending 5 points to like one time reroll maybe 2 dice or something, and then maybe do.
But even then, like if you're damaging on 5s, it's not just reroll any missed dice; it's reroll natural 1s. So there's that other bit to it.
That's right.
And my other criticism there is that the 2 units that can actually take it have such low attacks, and they're hitting on 4s. Like the Glade Stalkers, they've only got 10 attacks. So after you're, say, hitting on 4s or 5s with cover, the likelihood of getting 3 1s on that roll is really, really low.
So it's very unlikely you're going to get your 3 rerolls out of it. Then even if you do, your rerolls are unlikely, like not very likely to convert into damage. And it's one use. It's super duper niche, which is a shame because for an army-wide rule, I think it doesn't really get much worse than that one. When you compare it to like the Blade of Slashing on a hero, for example, where you can just reroll 1 miss per turn, also 5 points, you're going to be in combat like a couple of times. You're going to get that reroll. It's likely to result in a hit. It's going to be crushing, whatever. That's just so much more impactful than this kind of a situation. Even though it might read as similar, I think this is actually quite a bit worse.
I agree.
And before we go any further, we also have to note that the Sylvan Kin list is a theme list, so can't be taken as allies, and it draws a lot of its units from the master list, which is the elf list. So we're just going to go through the entire lot, not just the Sylvan Kin specific elements. And on that note, we'll start off with the first entry, which is the Infantry Bosque Wraiths, with no space between the Bosque or Wraiths.
Bensome, if I could be so rude, just before we start off, I wanted to make the comment about the list overall. And that's just that I had never read this list before in my life. So I'm just going to go out and say, look, this is blind leading the blind. I don't know much about this at all. I've never played Sylvan Kin. They seem to be extremely rare around these parts. But with all that said, I appreciated the listeners voting this one up because I really enjoyed reading through this list, and I think this list is so cool.
Okay, you done? All right, where was I? Okay, Boss Grace.
Yep. Proceed with the business. Sorry for adding flavour to the
It's
conversation.
like almost 10 minutes in. Or maybe not that far, maybe 5 minutes in. Okay, Boss Grace. Okay, third attempt. What are they? Infantry. They speed 6, melee 4, no ranged attack, and defense 3. They come in troop and regiments only, so no hordes on these guys. 20 attacks on the troop, 10, 12 nerve for 115 points, or the regiment, 25 attacks, 14, 16 nerve at 175. These guys are elite in combat. They have Fury, Pathfinder, and Wild Charge D3. And they've got a couple of keywords, Boss, Graith, Elf, and Verdant, which may factor in later on. So the Berserker unit of the Sylvan Kin.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, they're very cool. Particularly at the troop size, I think that's where they really come into their own. 14-16 is a little bit low nerve for a defense 3, 175 point unit for me.
Yeah, it's only 5 point difference. 5 attack difference between the two levels for 60 points. Yeah, I like the multiple troops, I think, is the way to go here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a couple of these floating around, behind your lines or whatever, and then getting stuck in there seems pretty scary. But so many attacks. Something's got to stick even with no crushing. And with the 12 inches plus D3 charge, hopefully they're going to get where they need to be, getting through the forest or what have you to sort of get into a flank or something is pretty
13
scary.
to 15 charge range is pretty good.
Yeah, they remind me of the Elf Berserkers from the Northern Alliance list. Similar vibe, because they've also got Wild Charge D3.
And the Elite with the
Piece of
lots of attacks
yeah.
is also very good.
And Fury. And Elite. They're basically the
So
same unit, actually.
are we giving these guys any items? I mean, probably not at the troop level.
No.
Are we taking regiments?
I just don't think it's required, so I don't think the regiments is worth it either. I think what you pay for in those that point increase, like the 60 point increase, is your unit strength bumps up by 2, but I just don't see this unit surviving the game as a regiment,
bumps up by
so
4.
they all of a sudden just become a bit more of a threat. Yeah. So, I'd just take them in 2 troops, I think, is how I sort of would look at it. Not using them as chaff, though, as such. Just that annoying unit that has to be dealt with.
Yeah, they're an interesting unit because it's such an elite army of quite expensive units for the most part that it might be difficult to fit them in. But there are certainly some builds where these guys could be really scary. And I get what you mean. Like, it's so often in Kings of War and ranks and flanks games in general that you kind of feel like you want 2 of a thing so that you can sort of have redundancy and they can hold one on each flank or whatever else. And I feel you there. 2 troops of these could be nice, but even 1 troop, because I think 2 troops is going to be very hard to afford in this list. But having 1 floating around just sort of in your back lines ready to pounce on a good opportunity could be really nice.
Yeah, and that Wild Charge D3 will catch people out, for sure.
Yes. Yep. So how about you tell us about the tall spears, Sellick, because you've used these all the time in your elf list?
Yeah, the Kindred Tall Spears. So speed 6, melee 4, no range, and defense 4. They come in troop, regiment, and hordes. The unit strength is 1, 3, and 4. The attacks in the troops is 12, regiments 15, hordes 30. The nerves going down there is 10, 12. And the regiments is 14-16, and the horde is 21-23, and the points 90, 140, and 230. The special rules, just like the elves, is elite with melee only, and they do get phalanx. What are your thoughts, Bensome?
They seem solid enough. I mean, melee 4 is fine, defense 4 is fine. I'm coming from goblins for 140 for a regiment. 15 attacks, 14, 16. Yeah, it's all fine. It's nothing.
Yeah, it's nothing amazing, but I actually don't mind this unit, and I think it was Huw that pointed out that the regiment size goes up to unit strength 3, and 14-16 is a pretty good nerve, like as in it's pretty standard nerve for 140 points. With phalanx, it does give them a little bit of survivability, just to hold unit strength in table quarters. So in scenarios like control, it's perfect just to sort of sit there and go, all right, well, you can come and get me, but you're going to have to do it by turn 4 because you probably need a couple of turns to kill me.
Yeah, the regiment's a good flank protector against flanking cavalry units and that kind of thing. I think you take this unit for phalanx because otherwise it's a very middling unit, which, sure, it has elite, but it's quite a lot of points and it doesn't do that much damage even with elite because it has no crushing, I think, for the most part. But it will hold really nicely against any cavalry or flyer charge because of that phalanx. So I feel like that's why you're taking them. You're taking a more defensive list, and either you're having regiments on your flanks or you're having hordes holding your centre or some combination thereof. And yeah, they'll do all right.
I've had some success with the Horde as well. Just having that 30 attacks, giving either crushing strength, the brewer's strength on them, or the +1 to hit.
Yeah, as soon as you put crushing on them, I think they become a nice kind of all-rounder unit. They're quite equivalent to like a Ratkin shock troop horde at that point.
Yeah. So what you're saying is if you're taking tall spears, make sure you get either the item or source of vein chain onto them.
In a Horde, yeah. Regiment, just run it vanilla, I'd say.
I would agree with that.
Cheap and cheerful, yep. And so we're not taking troops?
They're not terrible in troops, to be honest, but I think the purpose of them, it changes dramatically. So they're now just a unit strength 1 sort of. If you've got 90 points left over and that's sort of, you've got the models, I guess, it's probably handy.
I'd probably rather a regiment of Ger Panthers at that kind of points level if it was me, or even a bolt thrower.
But that's probably all about the tall spears. So I think we're over to the Forest Guard, Hugh.
Okay, Forest Guard are come in a troop, regiment, or horde. They have speed 6, melee 3, and defense 4, no ranged. Unit strength 1, 3, and 4, respectively, as you'd expect. They have 10 attacks, 12 attacks, and 25 attacks. Nerve 11, 13, 15, 17, or 22, 24. And the points are 105, 165, or 270. So these guys are a weird unit. They have elite, like most elves. They have Pathfinder, and they have Thunderous Charge. So they're this kind of offensive, sneak through the forest and charge and do a bit more damage kind of affair. So they're kind of like your tall spears that are a bit more offensive on account of that Thunderous Charge, I guess, and the Pathfinder. But they not quite as good on the defense because they don't have the phalanx.
They've got a slightly higher nerve than anything else in terms of
That's
infantry.
right. They've got an extra +1, yeah.
Yeah. 1 above average nerve, which is cool. That's useful to have. But on a not so defensive unit, they're a little bit more offensive because they're melee 3 instead of defense 4. I think this is a cool unit. Like in a horde, for me mainly, and we'll get onto some other units in future, which is the main reason that reinforces this point for me, because the Sylvan Kin have a lot of units that sort of fulfill fairly similar roles, and it's kind of like take your flavour, which one you prefer. For me, this one is nice in the horde because its regiment option is quite equivalent to a bunch of other units, and again, you could take whichever one you prefer. I don't think it's necessarily worse. But this one has a horde option, and it's your main offensive, impactful horde option. So if you take this unit with either a crushing strength item or a +1 to hit item or something of that nature, then you've got a big old wide unit which ignores terrain because of Pathfinder, and it's elite melee 3, crush 1, thunderous 1. Like, that's deadly as hell. 25 attacks from that bad boy. Yeah, so for me, the horde is the main thing that appeals to me with this particular unit type.
Yep, I'm exactly the same. Just literally copy-paste exactly what you said. Horde, bank it in there, give it the +1 strength item.
Yeah, there's no other unit in the whole list that really hits quite as hard and can take a hit, like, reasonably well. I mean, they're not the most defensive horde in the game or anything, but just D4 hanging out in terrain and hopefully trying to impede your opponent, and a little bit higher nerve means that they are definitely a good defensive unit, but then they really pack a punch offensively as well. So they're your elite butt kicker.
I don't mind them in regiments because thinking from a Gobble player who has Luggets, which are Fearless 15, so these guys in a regiment cost only slightly more, have a higher nerve, the same defense, but a melee 3 with elite and Thunderous Charge. I think that's actually decent. Fewer attacks, but more consistent. So I don't think they're as fragile as you might think, especially when you've got other items in the list. Yeah, so I think regiment's pretty good too.
The regiment is good. I agree the regiment's good, but as we'll get on to later, there's some other regiments and things around that price point which they'll compete for. And again, I don't think that they're really worse than them. They're just roughly equivalent, and maybe you want the others. The unique thing about this unit from the Sylvan Kin list specifically is that you can take the Horde, and the Horde kicks ass. Whereas there aren't other like big, fat, nasty 300-point mega Death Star kind of units in the list. So for me, that's what this unit fills the role of most primarily.
I think the troop is pretty much a waste of points. I think it's not great as chaff because it's the higher nerve, and often you just want it to die. It's not fast enough to, doesn't have like the wild charge, or it's not nimble to get it where you want it to be. So Panthers fill that role much better. I just think troops not worth it. They're not offensive, and they just die a lot easier compared to the regiment. Yeah, nah, don't waste your time.
Yeah,
with
there's
troops.
not many infantry units that you can take in a Horde that you actually want to take in a troop. Is there really? Like
No.
It's a bit of a scarce thing, and I'd be happy to be more than happy to be proven wrong one day when someone turns up with like I don't know 10 troops of some kind of elite infantry or something, kicks my ass. But until that day, or until I see one on the table at all, really, that does anything, I'm unconvinced that troops of elite infantry are any good at all.
Even then, it's a different discussion. That would make it a skew list, and skew lists are very rock paper scissors. It'll work with some, or won't work with others.
Yeah, and you've got like a Boss Graith unit or something like that if
Yeah.
you want a troop, and they've got
So
they're
much better.
not quite as staunch, but they have 20 attacks instead
Yeah.
of 10, and that's that much more impactful, obviously.
Okay, so we'll move to the next one. And more interesting unit is the Riverguard Tree Leapers. Leapers of Trees. Speed 7 on these ones, so decent there. Only 4, no ranged and defense 4. Troop and regiments only on this one as well. Unit strength 1 and 3 as you'd expect, with 10 and 12 attacks on the 2 there. 10, 12, no, 14, 16 on the regiment, and 110 and 170 points. These guys come with Crushing Strength 1 as standard, Ensnare, Fly, Nimble, and Pathfinder. And these guys are amphibious, as the keyword states. So, they're interesting in that Speed 7 Fly and Nimble and Pathfinder means they can zip about, but they're not super offensive because of melee 4 and only 12 attacks, but then they got Crush 1 as well. So, it's a weird unit. An interesting, weird unit.
Yep, so tell me, Bensome, in your opinion, what's its job? What's its role?
I feel like these are flankers. They don't have a whole lot of attacks up front, but they should be able to get flanks pretty easy with a 14 Fly, Nimble, Pathfinder. So you can kind of sit them behind terrain and then tree leap over into flanks.
It's funny, I don't see them that way, even though I think they could 100% be used that way. I see them as flying anvils.
I mean, the ensnare really helps for
They're
that.
fly, they're nimble, they're pathfinder, they're ensnare. So for me, what that says is, like, crush 1, 10 attacks in a troop, big deal. But I actually prefer the regiment for this particular unit. And what I like with them is holding them back until kind of the late game. So your opponent's coming towards your archer line or your Silver Breeze cavalry, which we'll get to later, or like some sort of, ranged threat or some description, some squishy elves. And then these dudes like jump out from behind the trees and position themselves in an annoying manner, kind of like a chaff unit, I guess. But instead of dying, you get them in a position where hopefully they have to be impeded and charge through terrain. And then you've got ensnare. And it's much easier to set that up when you have 14-inch fly and then a rotation and pathfinders you can land wherever you want.
I think that's it. They annoy people. I don't think they're going to make people complain on the internet.
But if you hold a unit up for 2 turns, that's awesome. I mean, yes, it's 170 points. That is an expensive way to do it. I admit that completely. And they're not necessarily better than just 2 units of chaff. But I really like the idea of them. I think this is a really cool unit. I read this unit, and then I read it again, and I stared at it for about a minute or two, and I'm like, what the hell does this unit need to do? And that's where I ended up landing, which could be wrong, but...
Well, you're right. It's not going to kill anything, but it's going to be harder to kill. Like, I mean, a low-ish nerve, 14, 16 for 170 points with ensnare, defense 4. So you're right, it's probably going to do 1 to 2 turns, depending upon what it's picked on. If it picks on something with melee 5, I think that's your best bet. It'll survive a hell of a lot longer, obviously pushing everything up to 6s to hit.
It's standard
but
regiment
it's still
nerve.
it's still going to lose wounds, though, at defense 4.
It totally is, yeah. But I think what it does is it gets in the way of something and doesn't die in a turn. Like, other things that get in the way of things die in a turn. This unit is meant to get in the way of something and hold it up for effectively 2 turns. Because if you land in 2 inches in front of a horde, they're in a spot where they just can't get rid of you. They can't charge you and kill you realistically because they're -2 to hit at that point. Next turn, like they probably will do a few damage, you're right, and then next turn they probably will get you, but that's not even a sure thing. Like if they just fluff their attacks. But even like a horde of elite infantry, they can't kill you in a turn with -2. So I think it's all about setting up that -2 with this unit.
Yeah, and I think across the entire Sylvan Kin list, they lack a lot of punch, I guess, and a lot of crushing strength across the board. So having a unit like this that can buy you 2 turns can actually be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think you either, if you get wavered, you don't care too much because I think you probably don't countercharge a lot of the time. Like if a big nasty unit charges you, you don't really countercharge with your 12 crush 1 attacks and get 2 damage in. Instead, you just reverse an inch and make them charge through that terrain again.
And also remember, you do have access to a fair amount of heal in this list. So while you were saying before, Sellick, that they would be taking wounds and being ground down, they can easily be brought back up to a healthy status as well, if you wanted to play that way.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you could. If with a heap of heal, I think this unit could be a huge pain in the ass, like massive pain in the ass. If you just keep backing off and healing this unit, man, it's so annoying. That's so annoying. I get that the tree kin kind of characters that we're going to get to soon have a similar role in that sense, but these guys are just so much quicker and nimbler and more maneuverable than those guys are.
All right, so we'll jump over to ranged infantry now, and I guess the first one off the rank is the Kindred Gladestalkers. So those are speed 6, melee 4, range 4, defense 3. They come in troop and regiments for unit strength 1 and 2, and the attacks is 8 and 10. Nerve is 10, 12, and 14, 16, pretty standard there. Points 130 and 175. They have a couple of special rules. Elite, just across the board, so not isolated down to melee or ranged. Pathfinder, Scout, and they all have nice pretty bows, which are 24 inches with steady aim. They do have the option, one of the 2 units that have the option for the Deathroot arrows for 5 points. What do we think?
Is what I think.
Mostly, I love these kinds of units, but I don't really get... I wish that they just were less bad. Like Rangers, Dwarf Rangers is probably my favourite of this kind of unit. That is I've got a heap of special rules. I'm this kind of scouty, sneaky, shooty kind of unit, but I cost a majillion points, don't do that much damage and aren't that hard to kill, which is not, when your damage output isn't that high and your defensive output isn't that good, or output, it's not really output, but you know what I mean, then you're in this weird spot where it's like, if I cost a lot of points, like what am I really doing? And there's so many units like this, like Scurriers in Ratkin is a classic one that I bagged out in our review, and others like it. But I really like this kind of unit, and I'm so compelled by them, and I always want to take 1 or 2 in my army lists, and they're the kind of thing that I add a troop in a regiment, or 2 troops or 2 regiments or something, and then at the end of the list I've cut them like every time because they just don't fulfill an effective enough role. They have so few attacks. And this is the army for it. This is your sneaky, wood elf vibe. That's what the Sylvan Kin are about.
Ranged 4 is good. Elite on top of that's good.
Yeah, they're very efficient shots, but they're crushing nothing. So
Well, you don't want them in combat. That's why you got Pathfinder.
Sorry, piercing nothing is what I should have said. But like if you heaven forbid you have to fire at something at defense 5, right? So hopefully you're shooting something defense 4 or maybe some defense 3 chaff or something. But if you're shooting defense 5, like these guys are just going to do stone nothing, even with their range 4 rerolling ones.
What's that, 2 to 3 wounds?
Yeah, they're locking in about
regiment.
1.89 wounds. Like, it's pretty bad. But 130 point troop. What do you think, troop or regiment for these guys even? I think it's tough.
I think it's definitely in that sort of confused, what is its role? So if it's scouting, it's got to be really careful about where its positions, and with this sort of list, it's going to be really hard to out-deploy things. So you're generally going to get a counter. It's vulnerable to plink damage. Any sort of magic missiles that are coming over, like lightning or short-armed fire, is going to slowly grind it down and start getting tests really, really quick. Particularly with defense 3, like that's, and so you can go, well, keep it in the forest and keep getting cover, but it will still slowly go down.
With all this said, my one experience that I played against 2 troops of these guys, it was with regular elves, not Sylvan Kin, but they're in regular elves as well. And he played 2 troops, and there was a heap of other things going on the battlefield. But the thing that interested me is I had a horde of Rat Kin shock troops, like pretty good unit. It probably had an item on it or something. So we're talking in like the 250 point kind of range horde unit that will obviously cream them in combat if it gets in range. And they just sort of scouted forward into range first turn, shot them. They moved. Like Ratkin guys move forward, shoot them again. So these 2 troops shooting out 16 shots a turn. It's only a defense 4 kind of elite unit, so I suppose that's probably somewhat their ideal target, other than maybe chaff units. But to my surprise, like as I got closer, I finally got in range to charge, and they'd done a heap of wounds. And then I charge one, and then the other one, like he got me in a spot where if I charged one, the other one would flank me. So I charge one, the other one flanks me, and then they've got Pathfinder, 16 attacks, elite, hitting on 4s, like still do enough damage, and it took me off, and I'm like, man, I just kind of got owned by these little 2 troops. It's actually about equivalent number of points, but it felt like these piss weak range units, I'm just going to own them. And I kind of realized, maybe this unit isn't quite as bad as it looks, but I do feel a bit like that's somewhat ideal circumstances.
I think you've nailed it though. There, you can't ignore them, because if you ignore them, that 2 point, particularly in the regiment, they will chip away and they will constantly do damage. And as you know, turn 5 to 7, those 2 to 3 wounds is sometimes the difference, and the difference in a game.
They're about 2 to 3 wounds a turn on average, which is not bad. I mean, yes, they've only got 8 shots, but 2 to 3 wounds is not that bad from a ranged unit. Like most ranged units in Kings of War are hitting on 5s. They probably don't have elite or whatever. They might have more attacks, but it boils down to like 1, 2, 3. If you're in that 2 to 3 wounds reliable range, it's actually decent at damage output. And it caused those panic checks and stuff from time to time, a route check. I feel like 1 troop of these could fit in some lists. I want to love them. I still think they're not great. But I think you could chuck a unit into a list or 2. Death Root arrows can go jump on a bike though.
Yeah. If you got 5 points. Still not even that. Healing Grew. Why don't you tell us and compare the Gladestalkers to the Kindred Archers, Huw?
Well, the Kindred Archers are your cheap and nasty version of that similar kind of backline shooting unit. You've got a troop, regiment, or horde, speed 6, melee 5, defense 4, range 5. So I think it's a pretty fair thing to compare them, as you said, Bensome. So we're talking 1 lower melee and 1 lower range, and 1 higher defense. Funnily enough, don't know where they get their extra defense for. Maybe they wear a helmet or something.
They wear more clothes.
They wear more clothes, yeah. And then you got troop, regiment, and horde, unit strength 1, 2, and 3, so 1 lower than a non-shooting unit equivalent would be, as is the norm. Attacks 8, 10, and 20, same as the Gladestalkers, except doubled in the horde, of course, because they got the horde option. 10, 12 nerve on the troop, 14, 16 nerve on the regiment, 21, 23 nerve on the horde, for 90, 120, and 210 points, respectively. So they have elite ranged only, not combat, and they've got bows. So as compared to the Gladestalker,
steady aim,
no steady aim, no elite in combat. They're noticeably worse in combat because they hit on 5s and they don't have elite, so they basically do 3/5 of bugger all in combat. But while as the Gladestalkers can sort of reliably put out a few wounds. And I think the difference there is that if a unit gets really close to you after you've been peppering it with shots all turn, Gladestalkers have this sort of realistic option of charging in and finishing off a unit that you've already done a bunch of damage to, and they'll actually do that fairly reliably because of Pathfinder elite. But the Kindred Archers, you just don't charge ever because they're melee 5, and
unless you're using them as chaff.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, you don't charge with the purpose of killing something, put it that way. So they just sort of stand there and they shoot. That's what they do. But the troop, regiment, and horde options gives you a lot of different versatile options. And I think the troop is kind of not a bad unit for sitting at the back, as you were saying, Sellick, versus the tall spears, because they can pepper out a few shots. They're not going to do that much with their shots. They're much less likely to get that reliable 2 to 3 wounds.
Better than nothing.
Of the Kindred Gladestalkers is more like a reliable kind of 1-ish wound. But that 1-ish wound is still a wound, right? It's still enough to cause a panic check as long as you don't fluff your dice completely. which is, as you say, better than nothing. That's okay. And I actually like the regiment of these guys quite a bit because that 14-16 nerve and defense 4, a lot of archer units have defense 3. These guys have 4. And just 14-16 nerve to just chill on an objective in the back line, pepper out a few shots from time to time, do a bit of this and that. Because you've so often got a backfield objective, I really like having a backfield objective unit that is designed to just sit on that objective. And for me, the two types of units that do that well with a decent nerve so that people can't just... the kindred archers on the other side of the board can't just fling one wound at them and kill them, which sometimes happens if you try to, hold it with like a unit of chaff. Your regiment units that do that well, you've either got like your kind of zombie type unit that sort of does nothing but is super cheap, or you've got this kind of unit. So a kindred archers regiment unit that will hold against a bit of light fire and keep chilling on that objective quite happily, but they'll pepper out a few shots in return on the other side of the board. So I like that.
Hordes seem like a difficult choice to make. They don't
used to be a mainstay for elves, right? But
but that ranged 5 just sort of kills it. That's a lot of points investment for a whole lot of nothing, really.
Yeah,
it's a unit strength 3 unit that if it gets in combat at all, it's not going to immediately die. Probably, like if you charge it with a unit of like a troop of cavalry or something, it's not going to die immediately, but it is hindered. It can't do really anything back in combat. It's gonna die sooner rather than later. So it's just this big old target.
They're as good as goblins in combat, which is not good.
Totally agree with everything you're saying, guys. So as a person that used to take hordes of this every single time, range 5 did change it. And it changed the purpose for the Kindred Archers for me. So now it becomes an unlock. And Huw, the way that you were using it in your analogies there, if you just deploy it in the back line, you put it in some forests, and 14-16 plus getting hindered, they stay for 2 turns pretty much every single time. And they're putting out, like, what is that, like 2 wounds a turn or something if you don't pay them attention and you're not giving them a threat. The Horde now is... Even though they've made it cheaper, it's still a threat and it will get shut down easy enough. And without the steady aim, it's not that versatile and you can outmaneuver it. And it's a lot of points in the grand scheme of things for not much output. So, yeah. For me, it's troops or regiments only.
If you're looking at a horde and you want to give them an item, like let's say you gave them some sort of... who cares what the item is, right? Your 210 plus a little item or something... For 240, 2 regiments, I'd much prefer. You've got more unit strength, more versatility on the battlefield, same damage output. Yeah, I prefer them at the regiment now. And I think the troop is a perfectly valid choice as well if you're a bit low on points and you just want someone to chew on the back and shoot out a few shots. But I do think that extra 30 points to upgrade them to a regiment is usually worth it.
Yeah. It's a very low threat when I've run it. Historically, not many people target it early, so it gets a few more turns than it normally would.
So I think it's an interesting comparison, the 10-shot regiment of Kindred Archers versus the troop of Kindred Gladestalkers, because the troop of Gladestalkers is 10 points more. They are softer on the defense because they're lower nerve and like much lower nerve. We're talking 4 lower nerve and lower defense as well. So they're way easier to kill, but they're a little bit better on the offense and they're much more maneuverable because they've got scout, pathfinder, and steady aim as well. So if you want to like sneak around in a forest, fling out a few shots and approach an objective, you'd rather have the troop of Kindred Gladestalkers, especially if you ever would even consider charging out of a forest into someone's flank. So a bit more dynamic in that sense, but the Kindred Archers are just a more solid unit for the unit that you're just sitting on the back line holding something.
Okay, and I think we might just do one more before we take a break. Round out the non-large infantry. So the one heavy infantry option that they have here are the Hunters of the Wild. So these guys are speed 5, melee 3, no ranged, defense 5, troop and regiments only, unit strength 1 and 3 with 12 attacks and 15 on the regiment, and nerves 10, 12, 14, 16 at 105 and 160 points. And these guys just have Pathfinder and Scout. So it's difficult because the melee 3, the higher than usual attacks, probably on par with the spear unit, but they don't have any sort of defense cracking ability unless you put items on them. But they're also defense 5, so it's sort of like more of an anvil unit for me.
They're a weird unit, aren't they?
It's a weird one.
Scout and Pathfinder, but they're not all that fast.
The closest comparison is actually a Forest Guard regiment because they're both... roughly equivalent points. 165 for Regiment of Forest Guard, 160 for Regiment of these guys. And for that, you get 3 more attacks and 1 more defense, which is pretty awesome. But you lose Thunderous Charge and Elite. So those attacks end up... What that boils down to is if the Forest Guard are charging and they get to use their Thunderous Charge, they'll be a little bit more impactful. Whereas if they're not charging, in any circumstance in which you're not using that Thunderous Charge, the Hunters of the Wild, the extra 3 attacks is slightly better than Elite. Slightly.
Yes. It works out. I think the Forest Guard in the regiment works out to be like 1 extra wound.
On the charge.
Yeah, on the charge. You
can't just assume... It's easy to look at these kinds of units and just assume that you're going to be using Thunderous Charge all the time, but I don't think that's necessarily a reality. You also keep an extra speed on the Forest Guard, and going from 5 to 6 is kind of big. So I think I agree with Bensome. These are more of a grind unit. The Forest Guard are like a get out there and smash unit, in the regiment at least. In a horde, they're grindier for sure. But in the regiment, I don't know, I feel like just because you can take Forest Guard in a horde, and for me, I probably would be in my army, I would take the Hunters in the regiment rather than a Forest Guard because they're such a comparable unit. I'd rather take a different one. That's just my personal feeling behind them anyway, but yeah.
You need to consider that their keyword is verdant as well, and there is an aura on one of the heroes to give verdant units vicious.
Oh, yeah.
So that
would be helpful.
Sort of increases their punch, but again, they don't have any defense crack, but they're melee 3, like the Forest Guard. And the Forest Guard
they do have 15 attacks, so giving them crushing is not necessarily that silly, giving them the crushing strength item in the regiment form, because they hit on 3s, they got 15 attacks, and yeah, if they had vicious reliably because of that character, I think you're in business at that point. Also, what if you took something like Blood of the Old King on these guys? It's not bad,
because you also do have access to heal and Radiance of Life, so even when you do take damage from Blood of the Old King, you can bring that back pretty quickly.
Yeah, relatively cheap Pathfinder unit that you can't really ignore and you can't really remove easily because you charge them. They do still have 16 nerve and D5. So.
And Scout's pretty handy.
Yeah, Fury would be okay on them as well. I think this is an interesting unit. Like it's kind of neither here nor there, and it gets quite a bit better with quite a few of those different items. But then it also does go up in points. So I'm not really sure where I land on them.
And there's not a whole lot of Defense 5 in the list, so factor in that as well. I think 10-12 Defense 5 is a pretty good speed bump because you can fang them up with Scout to begin with, and then...
That's right. In fairness, they compete with the Forest Shamblers, I guess, which we'll cover after the break. But they're, also that kind of Pathfindery, Anvil-y kind of affair.
All right. On that note, we will take a break, and when we come back, we'll top off the Cavalry and Large Infantry, and we'll see how we go.
All right.
Long ago, they rejected the ways of the other kindreds and fully embraced the arboreal origins of Panathor. They are antagonistic to any who would alter the natural order of the world and have little contact with other races. Most dwell inside the bounds of the mystic forests of Galahir, but a large contingent live in the twilight glades.
And we're back, and we're going to jump straight into large infantry. They've only got the one option, and that is the Shamblers. It's the Forest Shamblers. Speed 6, melee 4, no range, defense 5. They come in a regiment and horde. Unit strength 2 and 3, attacks 9 and 18. Their nerve is Fearless 14 and Fearless 17 for the points of 120 and 200. The special rules, crushing strength 1, Pathfinder, Scout, and Shambling. They also are the verdant keyword. Love these guys for 2 different roles. So as we've sort of discussed previously, the major weakness across this entire list is that crushing strength. So these guys do come in with crushing strength 1. So I personally like these guys in both forms. So the regiment more as like a heavy chaff. So they come up forward. They're dash 14, so really, really handy. They're slightly expensive on the chaff rankings, I guess, with 120 points. But if you get them in the flank, they can actually be quite dangerous, particularly with the vicious aura that's floating around. And the horde 18 attacks. They're pretty standard. I think they're going to be pretty much an auto include for this sort of list.
It seems like a mainstay, really. Crush one's fine, Pathfinder's great, Scout is meh, Shambling can be good, Defense 5 is good. I mean, they're just a solid large infantry elemental, really.
Yeah, they do almost... they're a little lower on the damage for your average large infantry unit, but a little higher on the defense. So they're kind of like your almost earth elemental type equivalents, I guess. I don't know. For me, I kind of have a bit of beef with Shambling in general, and trying to take like your mini little undead unit in your otherwise elfy kind of army, I guess. Although I get it, like, we're Sylvan Kin, we like trees or whatever. But the whole like they feel like the frogs on easy mode for me. So they fill a similar role. They get out in front, they be an anvil, they hold up time for the rest of your unit so that your cavalry can charge in, or your flying unit, or your shooters can keep shooting, whatever. That's their role, right? They're an anvil for the most part, for me anyway. Well, I acknowledge, Sellick, you're saying that you can do a bit more with them. But they just, I don't know, I just feel like frogs are for like the genius player, the smart player who's like, frog life, I'm going to hide behind a forest, I'm going to jump out, I'm going to poke my tongue out at you, it's going to be rad. And for the player that sort of just likes to move units forward 7 inches a turn, and then
6.
If they stuff up their 6, sorry, if they stuff up their positioning, then they can just surge you in the flank or whatever, and you try to take advantage of your opponent's stuffing up. And
they are far less maneuverable than the frogs.
Yes, but they're also less fragile when you stuff it up. Like, they're less forgiving as a unit. I feel like this.
Yeah,
they're good, but they're boring, really.
Yeah, they're boring. I think they're boring too. I agree.
That's it. Take them. They're fine. They're boring.
I don't mind them. I'm boring, I guess.
Everyone likes them.
Yep, I think it's the crushing strength one that makes them the include. And I think the biggest difference between the Riverguard tree leapers, other than being frogs and trees, is that it's the tree leapers are irregular, so they don't unlock where these do.
That's right. Very true.
But it's not like you're
very
taking
true. If you're heading for unlocks. That's just another reason why the tree leapers are for your elite gamer, while as these guys are for just your push it forward, bloody I'm a tree, look at me kind of characters.
Sure.
The vicious aura that we're talking about later, this is the one sort of unit that can actually capitalise on it quite well.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm taking such a firm stance on this, but this is my hill and I've chosen to die on this one for some reason. I don't know why.
How about you tell us about the more exciting unit, the Windborn?
Windborn unit. Okay, so speed 10. Right on. This is the speed we want to have. Elite, nimble, and windborne arrows. So they have wind blast 7
and other stats.
No, who cares about the rest? So they go fast, they rotate, and they shoot arrows. Right on. And they're windy arrows. So yeah, okay, they're a troop. They only come in a troop. They're a one-off. They're a unique special unit of special flowers, and they have 7 attacks, melee 4, defense 4. So they're not a good attacking unit, obviously, in melee. Melee 4, elite, which is nice, but 7 attacks, no crushing, nothing like that. And they're 165 points, so they're very, very expensive troop. Got to be one of the most expensive troops in the game, I would think, just at this particular moment in time. But yes, their speed is all hell.
11, 13 nerve as well.
They don't have Pathfinder. It's interesting to note. So you kind of got to watch that. Most of the cavalry in this list don't have Pathfinder. It's almost like they've actually thought that maybe cavalry can't just dance through the treetops or whatever, like they do in other lists for some absurd reason.
We all know the wind gets caught in the trees.
Indeed, that's also a problem. So these guys like to flap about on the wind beautifully and wind blast things. So they're 165 point unit that kind of does nothing except move 10, rotate, and wind blast something. But that's pretty cool. I like that.
But yeah, the wind blast does damage, so that's where the windborne arrows comes in.
Yes, so if you do 3.5 hits on average,
3 to 4, and then so it's not just damage; it's wind blast. So you're pushing dudes around and then getting some extra damage. And we all know how useful wind blast is.
Yes, it's a mainstay staple of every tournament army, isn't it?
Yeah. With elite as well.
I know we're all in jest here, but Wind Blast, and I'm still not sure I like this unit, but Wind Blast plus a few Surgy units can actually be, it increases in value there. So movement 10, you can get up into flanks, push stuff over, surge it into flanks, and can actually be helpful. I'm just not sure
I think
165
it's
points
a
is the
lot
investment that I want to
harder
do with
to
it.
do that trick because when you're blasting, you're pushing away, so you have to set up beforehand your Surgy units to be angled, looking at the flank you're hoping to push them into, and you can only get one of this unit.
Yeah, it's so situational, and you're 1,000% correct. It's so hard to do reliably.
Yeah, I think if you had undead and you had a heap of surge going on, then that would be a little bit more realistic. But I feel like that's not as much what they're for. They're there to just annoy your opponents by whatever their most important unit they're lining up. You very reliably knock that unit 3 or 4 inches back and do a couple of damage, so you can just keep shooting them with the rest of your army. So they're kind of an annoying unit for your opponents to play, but I think that'd be a really fun unit to play. I like this unit. I think it's crap, but I really like it.
Yeah, I think I'm of the same opinion. I think it's rubbish, but I like them. If they were maybe 140 points, I would probably more keen to take them.
165 is a lot.
Yeah.
That's a regiment of something decent.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit too expensive for me, yeah.
Alright, let's get into something that everyone takes. The other cavalry unit. Wild Ger Panthers, which are irregular. Speed 10, melee 4, no range, defense 3. Troop and regiments, unit strength 1 and 3 on that. 6 attacks for the troop, 12 for the regiment. 9-11 nerve, 12-14 on the regiment at 85 points and 130. These guys are nimble, have Pathfinder, and are also vicious. Vicious little beasties. So for Jaff, troops great, because speed 10 nimble, you just get wherever you want to.
Speed 10 nimble and Pathfinder, that's as close to flying Jaff as you can possibly get without actually flying.
The regiment's okay in terms of damage output, melee 4 with vicious, and probably getting flanks, because the speed 10 move up 20 turn, and then
regiment's not bad at all.
With.
130, it's only melee 4, and no crushing, I get it, but vicious and so fast, as you said. If you can get that flank, and I mean, you can totally get that flank.
Yeah,
because they're so
that's
fast.
it.
That's 24 attacks.
And a sneaky Bane Chant.
With vicious. Oh, a sneaky Bane Chant. Get amongst it. Love it.
Yeah, and that Pathfinder means that you're not going to be hindered, so they're probably hitting on 4s almost all the time, apart from Phalanx.
As like the default chaff unit, you'll probably mainly see them in troops, but I really do think the regiment's got teeth.
Unit strength 3 on the regiment's decent as well. So even if you just wanted to keep them back for most of the game and then contest or completely dominate a section or objective.
It's quite a low investment, especially for an elf army, for a unit that is fast, reasonably impactful, and has good unit strength.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. And I guess the primary use, and why Bensome sort of alluded that they're an auto-include or something that people would always take, is they're the best chaff that you can get without wings. So they're so fast, they're so cheap, perfect for this sort of army that needs to buy turns. So,
and it doesn't always matter, but sometimes charging with your chaff and just doing a couple of wounds quite reliably, as these guys will, is slightly better than just sitting in front of it. Like sometimes those 2 wounds or something like that don't really matter, but sometimes they do.
And then you double 6, and then you waver them.
If you pull that off, that's kind of bollocks, honestly. Yeah, I mean, when a heavily wounded unit, this unit is a threat, while as, say, Vermintide, they could easily just do 0 wounds, but these guys, they've got relatively few attacks, but they're very reliable.
Give them don't give them items, keep them cheap, keep them
honest.
Certainly not.
Clean.
Yeah, they've got everything they need. They've got wild, they've got Ger, they're Panthers. What else do you want?
Alright, how about we take some horses? What are the horses got, Sellick?
Well, we'll go on to the first lot of horsies, and that is the Silver Breeze. So they're irregular, so these are the shooting cav. So speed 10, melee 4, range 4, defense 4, all of the 4s. They come in troops and regiments for unit strength 1 and 2. Attacks are 7 and 14. Nerve is 11, 13, and 14, 16. The points, 130 and 200. Special rules, they've got just the 1, nimble, but they do have short bows, which they have elite. and steady aim with only 18 inches on those short bows. They do also get access to the death root arrows that you won't take because we said so. Naturally, as a cav unit, they're height 3 as well.
I like them quite a bit. I like them quite a lot. To me, this is what elves are. They're just sneaky assholes, you know? Like, they just fly around, trotting about, doing some dressage.
Again, it's
posing.
It's not fly, but it's essentially fly. Speed 10 nimble.
Yeah, it's close to fly, for sure. The fact that they don't have Pathfinder, again, you've got to actually use your brain with this cavalry unit a little bit in how you maneuver them. But yeah, you can do the whole Mongolian thing and like just ride around and shoot arrows at dudes.
They hit as well as the Gladestalkers with range 4
right.
and elite.
That's right. I mean, 18 inches versus 24, that definitely matters, especially if you're facing against flyers. I think flyers are the absolute bane of this unit because, they have speed 10, but to get within range with your short bows, you need to be within range of charge. So against other cavalry and flyers, they definitely have a pretty strong Achilles heel, I reckon. But a couple of regiments against these against like a really infantry heavy army, kind of hilarious and awesome in my book, I reckon. Like one regiment with 14 attacks is a bit more of a peppery thing, but 400 points, sure. But two regiments of Silverbreeze cavalry can put out 28 elite 4+ ranged attacks after moving 10 and rotating. Like, that's pretty cool. That takes units off, and then all of a sudden they become a real threat. And like, good luck engaging them if you don't have many flyers.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a massive investment for
I
that.
love it. That's just elves for me. If you just want to play like hardcore infantry that smack things up, then play a different army. Like if you want to play like la-di-da, princey, puncy mofos that ride around shooting arrows at things, then play Silverbreeze Cavalry, man. You're an elf.
I think fire oil is okay on these guys as well, just because it gives them the pierce on region units only.
Yeah. That's
and
good.
it's only a 5-point investment, so it's hard to get. I don't think you can get pierce any other way, really.
No.
Seems slightly better than Death Root Arrows. Although, Death Root Arrows, this is probably the best unit for them, just purely because if you've got a regiment, you've got 14 attacks, so you've got some chance, as Sellick said, of actually rolling enough ones. So you can choose with Death Root Arrows, right? Like after you roll, whether you want to use them. Yeah. So that on the turn where you just roll a heap of ones, you do it, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But then you probably just won't roll. Well, it's a win-win, right? Because if you don't roll heaps of ones that I'll
then
gain,
you're hitting.
Then
You're
hitting. Just roll heaps of 2s instead.
Yeah. Yep. I like them.
No, I like this unit.
I wouldn't take any more than 2 probably. Mostly 1 just to be annoying, but otherwise, I think they're solid.
Yeah, I like them quite a bit. Probably more than I should, but for me this is just exemplifies what an elf unit, like what elves are in my head. Like Wood Elves was my first army in Warhammer. When I was 12, I started collecting Wood Elves. They were my jam at the time. And as much as I've moved away from the pointy-eared gits over the years in a big way, like I feel like maybe from playing Blood Bowl, Bensome with my elf team, but I'm starting to move back towards the gits again. Maybe like an evil streak is coming back into my life as I've aged a bit more, and I'm like, I can get back into this kind of a unit.
Another good thing about these guys is if you can keep them alive, because they're speed 10 nimble, you can get them to where you need them to be for objectives and areas of control or whatnot. So unit strength 2 on that's pretty good.
Yeah.
They should be pretty handy and pretty easy to keep alive. Obviously, I think it was Huw said, you've got 2 main threats, really. It's your flyers and also your nimble mounted characters. So they're the only 2 things that should catch this easy. Because you've got scout on most of your units, that's all pushing up. So it should be holding off everything else. So you should be able to get your 18 inches range on your short bows pretty well. And Bensome nailed it on the head there. Objective play, turn 6-7. These are made for it.
I think if these guys have survived till turn 6-7, you're doing pretty well. If you've got a regiment of these that have spent 6 or 7 turns shooting the whole time, 14 shots a turn, and then they've jumped onto an objective, you're going to be like, this is the best 200 points I've ever spent. If they get in a spot where they're like, have to keep backing off because they're getting harassed by a dragon, then like, they look a bit crap at that point.
Yeah, but they could still do that. And I think that's the best bit about it.
But even if they do get attacked, they don't lose their nimble because it's built in. It's not attached to fly, so they can still zip around.
Oh, I forget that. Yeah, that's good. Because I rarely have units that have nimble, like proper nimble. But you're right, yeah. If they got 14, 16 nerve, as long as they hold, they
So
can
it's
just
still solid, yeah.
hoost the hell out of there like fast cavalry would. Love
Yep.
it.
Like it.
How about you?
They are a regular.
They are.
though, yeah.
It's you're taking bunches of shamblers or whatnot anyway, so that's all fine.
If only they had 360-degree range. That's all I want from these guys, so they could be like real Mongolians and
that'd
shoot
be,
backwards on the saddle.
pretty OP. But anyway, tell us about the non-shooting variety.
It would. Stormwind Cavalry, you mean?
Yeah,
Okay, so these guys, they're not just breezes, they're full-on winds. They're
not
stormy
just winds, they're storm winds.
Oh, yeah, they're angry. So in they come. They've got Wind Blast 10. No, sorry. They've got Thunderous Charge 2.
Hang on a sec. If we got
They're storm
Stormwind
winds.
Cavalry, they should have called the shooty guys Slight Breeze Cavalry.
Slight breeze. It's
Instead of
silver
silver
breeze.
breeze.
So silver.
Anyway,
So
continue.
these cavalry have speed 9, so obviously they're total slowpokes compared with the mighty silver breeze. They have melee 3+, which is awesome. Defense 5, which is also awesome, especially when you're a scummy elf. Range dash. Troop 5, Regiment 10. Don't know why I called out the unit size. There you go. Unit strength 1, unit strength 3, respectively. 8 attacks on the troop, 16 on the regiment. 11, 13 nerve on the troop, 14, 16 on the regiment. Dead standard there, pretty much. One higher on the troop.
On the troop. Yeah.
140 points and 215 respectively. So these are your hard-hitting elite melee Thunderous 2 3+, just powerhouse cavalry. So these are the elves that kick ass on the charge.
As long as they're not hindered.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they're not hindered. So they actually have Pathfinder. It's an unknown fact. But when I said they're 215 points for the regiment, what I actually meant is that they're 235 points for a regiment because they have Macqua's Potion of the Caterpillar bolted onto them at all times.
That's
Well,
right.
sometimes they're, 230?
30, that's right.
Instead.
Because they have the boots, yeah.
Yeah.
That's if you have a second unit of them or you are short 5 points. So these are basically Pathfinder, and King's War needs to get rid of those 2 items, man, I tell you. They just get rid of them. You need to use cavalry like a man. I say that even though I myself also take cavalry units with those items. It's too easy mode. Anyway, Thunderous Charge 2, like you cannot afford to be hindered when you're melee 3 and Thunderous Charge 2, because you can hit like a wet noodle or like a Mack truck, depending on whether you're hindered or not.
Yeah, avoid spheres at all cost.
Yes, that's right. Phalanx are these guys' worst nightmare. Actually, I played a game, that same game I'm thinking of, actually. I'm not sure why I remember it so clearly, but the one where the...
Trauma?
Trauma? Yeah. I actually think I won, so maybe not, but the one where the little units of Kindred Gladestalkers, the little Kindred Gladestalkers were like shooting off my shock troops, that same game. He had a couple of Stormwind Cavalry, and my little regiments of like my tiny cheap-ass Skaven rat beasts, my ratkin friendos, were holding up the Stormwind Cavalry for days because they were just standing in forests with their phalanx, just saying, "Come at me, bro." So I do love that sort of little regiment of spears on the flank, as Sellick was talking about before. But yeah, I mean, forget that. Stormwind Cavalry are amazing. Just
if you give them Crush 1 as well, then they just absolutely decimate anything.
They're
As long
speed
as they don't
9.
get hindered.
They're melee 3. They're just point and click unit.
Yeah. My only call out here, having used these guys a lot, is that nerve, 14, 16, will catch you out a lot. You will get chipped away and you'll be wavered.
Standard regiment nerve, right? They just attract more firepower because they're scary.
They're a threat. They're a genuine threat. So you have to shut them down as an opponent. You look across the table at all these things that are shambling over and having some plink damage, and then you have a look at this thing that can actually come across, reach across the entire table, so you have to target it. And unfortunately, like Defense 5 is great, and 14, 16 nerve just seems to catch you out, and you'll have to run 2 units to get 1 in.
If only Potion of the Caterpillar wasn't bolted on, because then you could take like the Staying Stone or something cheeky like that. It might actually be useful on this kind of unit.
Yeah.
Fury is pretty good too.
Fury, yeah.
As is Headstrong.
Yep, you'll never see it though.
But it depends on how much you want to invest in a regular unit, once again. I wouldn't be taking these guys in a troop.
I think because it's 140 points
Yeah.
for a troop.
Like, it's a very good troop, and sometimes troops of cavalry are good, but the troops of cavalry that are good tend to be quite cheap. 140 points. Yeah, I mean, that's so many points, isn't it? That's just so many points for something that effectively doesn't hit that hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, regiments, fantastic. Ignore that terrain.
Yep.
Point and click. Try not to get shot too much. Stay at 8-inch range as much as you can. GG.
All right, so what we'll do is we'll just go onto their one war engine before we go for a break, And that war engine is a simple bolt thrower. Speed 6, no fighting ability, no melee there. Range 4, defense 4. No unit strength as with all war engines. 2 attacks, 10-12 nerve for 90 points. And this bolt thrower has a 48-inch range, blast D3 on those 2 attacks. Elite, and piercing 2, and reload, so no moving and shooting. I think ranged 4 elite is always good for war engines. So it's fairly reliable in that way, so you're always going to be putting a couple of damage on. If you've got 2, even better, and then it makes it super consistent. Probably wouldn't go 3. I don't think you need to spend that many points. 270 points on 6 attacks. No, it's not that good. They're okay. They're an okay choice.
Their damage output for that sort of a couple of wounds, as you said, Bensome, like sometimes they'll do like, I suppose the maximum is 6, but they might occasionally do sort of 3 or 4 with a good shot. But, you know, they're quite reliably doing a couple. Their damage output is a little bit better point for point than any of those kind of shooting units that we were talking about earlier, the regular archers or the sneaky archers or whatever. The damage output of the bolt thrower is slightly better, and in exchange for that, you've got a very easy to kill unit that doesn't claim objectives.
I don't think many people go for these war engines because there's so much that you have to get through to get to them. It's like too much effort to try and do that. So I found with my fairly average war machines, like as long as I'm not spamming them to make it a threat, they survive the entire game.
Yeah.
There's just, people don't worry about it. I say, it doesn't claim objectives, so I'll be fine. And so this is consistently just putting out a couple of damage each turn and causing those nerve rolls.
They're really solid, especially if you're considering a troop of kindred archers to sort of protect your backline a little bit and fling out a damage or 2. I think you should really strongly consider the bolt thrower instead. It's got exactly the same nerve and defense, but it puts out a little bit more damage, and significantly more damage if you're talking about a decent defense unit, because it's Pierce 2 versus Pierce nothing. So if you're fighting something with decent defense, it's going to do a little bit more work. It has an obscene range as well, 48 instead of 24. There's actually not a lot of reason to consider that troop of archers unless you need the unlock, really. Like, you don't have the unlock for the bolt thrower, which could well be the case. But yeah, as you said, Bensome, I reckon 2 bolt throwers is great, really reliable long-range damage. And I actually think 1 is worth considering sometimes, because I find that when I've played games with 1 war machine, sometimes your opponents, maybe not really good opponents, but sometimes medium opponents will overthink it. You know, like if you put it in your deployment zone, you just go, here's a war machine, deal with it.
Yeah.
They'll like either put fast units to deal with it when they don't really need to, because it's only 90 points, it's not going to do that much anyway.
Yep.
Or they'll like overthink it and try to like put their monsters out of line of sight and that kind of stuff. And you're like, well, if you've got that kind of a situation from a bolt thrower, that's right. And all it does is 1 wound and gets killed, but you've got that kind of maneuverability advantage from turn 0. That can actually happen with war machines. I think people underestimate that sometimes.
Yeah, the piercing 2 definitely fills up the weakness in this list as well. So it can actually put a few wounds down on defense 6, defense 5 units that it can actually struggle with. So I love these units, and I think not a bad investment for 90 points if you've got the unit strength for the scenario play already in your list.
100%.
Yep. Okay, so we'll take a break now, and when we come back, we will go through the other half of the army, the heroes.
It's true, it is half the army, man.
While the armies of the Fae still continue to adopt many of the traditional elven battle formations and unit types, their appearance mimics the wild nature of the Fae themselves. Armor and weaponry may appear organic and even grown in place, adapting to the wearer. When the Fae are roused to war, the clarion calls of ancient iron oak horns resonate and reverberate through the trunks of the majestic woodland sentinels, a sonorous and mournful note that stirs the creatures and spirits of the forest and summons the great host to battle.
Alright, we're back again to go through, as Bensome said, the massive amount of heroes that makes up half of the Sylvan Kin list.
It's a very heroic army.
It is very heroic indeed. A lot of heroes in the forest. So the first one that we're going to run through is the Archwraith, with speed 6, melee 3, range dash, defense 3. Got no unit strength as it's only an infantry, unit there with 6 attacks. It is Fearless 13 for 80 points. It's got quite a few special rules. So Elite for its melee, it's individual, it's inspiring but only to boss wraiths. It's got Pathfinder and Wild Charge D3. Keywords there, boss wraith, elf and verdant. Only height 2, but that's okay. Don't mind this guy as the War Machine Hunter if you are a big fan of that unit, and it's helpful in your meta. So yeah, pretty handy. What do you think?
Speed 6 is a bit low for War Machine.
Yeah, you have
Hunter.
to give it flying.
You're thinking you give it the wings?
Give it the wings. Yeah, I'll definitely with the wings.
Defense 2, and very easy to fight back with
Defense
any other
2,
individual.
Defense 3.
Yeah, Defense 2, Defense 3. Actually, don't think that makes that much difference.
Because a lot of other individuals have maybe no crush like this guy, or maybe one. So if you're coming at me with this guy, I think, I'm going to get your war machines, I can just punch you with something else and just easily convert. I'm not a fan of this guy.
True, that's true. But if you're shooting him at range, it's individual, right? And it's dash 13.
You have the lightning bolt.
Even if it's defense 2, even with a lightning bolt, your 5's to hit. How high is your lightning bolt stat? Yes, you're going to auto wound it pretty much.
It's one of the good targets 13. For Fireball. Fireball.
If you can get that close.
For sure, good for Fireball. Yeah. Which is kind of appropriate, right? For a spooky wookie guy. He likes hanging around archways, waiting for people to walk past and then going... I think that's what he's into.
I think you've got to use him wisely, but you've pretty much got one turn before he's going to hurt stuff. So he's got... With wings, which is, I think, the only way that I would take him, he's going to have, 21 to 23 inch range. So you move him up once, and then he's got charges on. So... I think he can be quite nasty, particularly with melee 3, 6 attacks with elite. But Bensome, you're right. He's automatically a target if you've got a heavy war machine type list. But yeah, I still think it's worth thinking about. I
think if you've got 2 or more troops of boss wraiths, I think this guy is pretty cool. Because you've got suddenly then that you can turn him into, you can use his inspiring, you can turn him into a bit of a flank of dudes, and then you can run around with those guys and just add a few extra wounds, and it's actually kind of a scary little force. Yeah. Or as you say, Sellick, I like the wings on him too. It boosts him right up to, is it? It's 45, points. Right? So 125. Yeah.
125. See, but then you can take a king on a horse, which is almost as good in terms of
different roles.
Defense 5, 25 attacks, but then crush 1 with elite and mighty, and inspires everyone, not just boss wraiths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't really disagree with that at all.
Yeah, you got me there. But
it is only 20 extra points, isn't it, for a wider role, so more than one role.
Yeah.
It's not just a War Machine Hunter, it's a blocker.
Pretty hard to compete in general with the King on horse in this army. He's really good. But also just...
Yeah.
I like the idea of having a 20-inch charging unit with Wild Charge D3. I just think that's cute.
Yeah. That's fun.
It's very helpful.
That's about it. Cute. Give it... No, that's it. That's it. That's all I can think of. I would probably avoid taking this thing unless I have a lot of boss wraiths and no other inspiring. But that is not an army I would take. So
if you've got a lot of boss wraiths, I'm
leaving it out.
This guy's actually coming in your army because that's actually where he needs to land. Forget the wings for a second.
It would be great if it had an aura of some sort to affect the boss wraiths, not just inspire them.
Yeah, but he adds a bit of punch to the units. While as if you have, say, like a banner bearer kind of character, he's only a few more points than that, and he's more kind of in the theme. He's quicker, he's cooler, He does a little bit of punch. He fits in with the boss grace. He can keep up with them because of the wild charge. So he fits in with that particular scenario, I think, reasonably well as a cheap, inspiring character. Because if you've got a bunch of boss grace, you probably don't have any points. But so, I don't know. He's got a very niche role, doesn't he?
It's very niche.
So I've just sort of had a bit of a look because I've always looked at this character in the list and said, it's going to work exactly like the Gulgas from the Undead.
He does seem similar.
So I thought I better actually, before I say it on a podcast, actually have a look at the Gulgast again. For an extra 15 points, the Gulgast gets Crushing 1, Life Leech 2, and an extra point of defense for 15 points. It does acknowledge it's 12-14 nerf, so it
doesn't have
elite
elite either, does it?
No, it doesn't.
It is a similar kind of unit role still, despite all those differences. Yeah.
I don't know. Take it if you got lots. Otherwise, I wouldn't.
I think with wings, even if you do compare the Elven King, it is a little bit cheaper than the King. If your opponents are always taking a lot of War Machines.
Yeah, War Machine Hunter or cheeky, themey, wraithy thing. Yeah.
What's next?
Forest Warden is a big old tree fellow, or a medium... Actually, he's a medium-sized tree fellow. He's like, if you've got, like, say, a lemon tree, he's about that size. He's not really, like, oak tree size, and so he's nowhere near, like...
Large
palm
bush.
tree, coconut tree,
massive
kind of vibe.
shrub.
Yeah, he's more like lemon, maybe lime on a good day. So he's speed 6, melee 3, defense 5, unit strength 1. So he's large infantry, so he gets to use that to claim objectives. 3 attacks, which is obviously pissant. Nervous, 11 and 13, and 90 points. So he's Crush 2, Nimble, Pathfinder, Scout. So the purpose of this guy, I think, comes down probably to Surge 4. So if you take similar to Archwraith, in that Archwraith is kind of, I think, not bad if you have a bunch of Boskwraiths. Appropriately, this guy's not bad if you've got a bunch of Forest Shamblers, because he can keep up with them by scouting alongside them. He is the same speed as them, but he can also claim objectives and stuff in the late game, which I think is pretty nice. But more importantly, he can... surge his friendos into flanks and other cheesy such things.
It's a shame he doesn't inspire trees, though.
Yeah, that seems a bit weird to me, that he doesn't have inspiring wardens
Verdant
or something.
or whatever.
Verdant. Yeah, maybe inspiring Verdant would have been too good, I don't know.
It's pretty powerful. If you give this guy inspiring for Verdant, you can make an almost all Verdant list here comfortably, and all of a sudden he's very versatile and a scoring.
Why is it such a bad thing that you
inspiring
can take it?
Yeah.
All Verdant list.
Why does he only have 3 attacks? What's his deal there?
He's probably holding a big stick or something. He's old.
Use the stick, man.
The Forest Shamblers have... I was about to say they have below average number of attacks. They don't. They've got 18. That's normal for large infantry, isn't it? Yeah, can't he at least muster 4?
Jeez. They did boost him, though. He used to be only melee 4.
Okay.
So I'm glad they brought that down to melee 3.
So I guess it's good for grounding flyers if they get too close, so they can't. And then, no, I don't know.
He's not bad at all. Like, forget his attacks. He's like a fairly medium cost mage, especially if you give him the inspiring talisman. He's a medium cost mage. He supports like a mage does with his surge, and he has the advantage of, in the late game, claiming an objective. He's not as good as like a lot of sort of ogre characters at that large infantry kind of slot.
No.
But then ogre characters are like really good for some reason.
If you've got a lot of unlocks, it could also be used as chuff, just because speed 6 and nimble.
And scout.
So he can get in the way. 90 points is solid for that role.
If you don't have something to surge, forget about him. But if you do...
Yeah, there's no point.
I'll tell you what, though, if you have a look at this whole list, if you've got a spare 90 points, how many options do you have?
Many.
Lots.
Many
lots,
options.
Yeah. I'd rather a bolt thrower than this guy most days of the week.
Yeah.
Twice on Sunday.
All right, let's move on to the Master Hunter. So this fella is a infantry hero. So we've taken a step back again. Speed 7, melee 3, ranged 3, defense 4, 4 attacks, 11, 13, over 115 points. Elite, so that's for melee and shooting. Individual inspiring for tracker only. Pathfinder, scout, stealthy, and has bows. He has many bows, which are 24 inch and piercing 1. And you can give him the 5-point don't take item.
Yeah, so what's even harder to find the points for in your list than like the sneaky scout, lots of rules, doesn't do much unit? The sneaky scout, lots of rules, doesn't do much character. He used to be a debater in his youth, but now he hunts.
Well, to be fair, he's quite reliable with his ranged attacks, being 3, ranged 3 and piercing 1, and elite on it, and steady aim because he's individual. He should be doing at least 1 point of damage every turn.
He dishes out that 1 or 2 wounds in a similar way to several of those earlier 90-point units we mentioned that can also claim an objective.
And this guy also inspires trackers, so that is your Forest Guard, your Glade Stalkers, which I guess is pretty solid. We'll say how good they were before.
So you don't have to have a themed army per se, but if you have more than 1, I'm going to go as far as to say 2 or more units that are trackers, you take this guy. You got 2 or more shambling forest characters, you take your forest warden. You
Yeah.
got 2 or more box wraithy friendos, you take your arch wraith. That feels like exactly a similar role between these 3 characters. In any other circumstance, I would not be taking these 3 characters.
Yep. That sounds pretty spot on.
It's pretty hard to take these guys.
Yeah, 2 units of trackers, if you had them, rather than a third unit of trackers, so 2 troops, let's say, or 2 regiments, whatever, rather than a third unit of those guys, having this guy in between them, inspiring them, keeping up with them when they're scouting and adding an extra couple of wounds on the damage or whatever, I think that's a worthwhile choice. It's kind of like putting even more points into something you've already invested heaps of points into that isn't necessarily all that effective. But it's kind of doubling down, right? Like you've already put all those points in, so you might as well put enough that they can actually
In for a penny, in for a
be
pound.
meaningful. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. There is, and it's like piercing 1, which is great.
Range
So,
2 piercing 1.
Yeah, it does help.
Yeah, it's good for that role. Anyway,
Chip.
otherwise, leave him home. So, who's next?
No, you just did Demand Thunder? Then it must be me to go through the Tree Herder. So speed 6, melee 3, no range, and defense 6, the Mighty Tree. Unit strength 1 with 9 attacks, fearless 18, thanks for being fearless now, and points 260, quite an investment, but pretty hard hitting. With its crushing 3, it's got inspiring Pathfinder, Radiance of Life, which is great, Scout, as well as Strider. It does have Surge 8 as its spell, and the only thing that you really need to know about the Tree Herder is that it can be upgraded to Wilt Daddy, which is obviously a 1 use only, you can only upgrade 1. It does lose its Radiance of Life, but it increases its tax by 1 up to 10, and its nerve now goes up by 1 as well over to Fearless 19. It also gains the aura that we've been discussing earlier, which is vicious to all the verdants, and it also gets the Cloak of Death for a measly 40 points, so it goes up to a 300 point Wiltfather. How good is Wilt Daddy?
It's pretty good.
Tree Herder's like a friendly, helpful ent from the woods that's sort of herding his mates around, just being like, over here, tree. And then the tree's like just chilling. He's like, over there. And it gradually moves. It's a very slow herding kind of experience. It's like the opposite of herding cats. But and he's like giving them life and stuff, probably spreading a bit of fertilizer around and stuff.
Well, Father's grumpy.
What a guy.
The Wilt Daddy's an angry asshole. He's the opposite. He's instead of healing his homies, he's making them all cranky, and he's just I don't know, got Cloak of Death. Is that like thorns and stuff coming out of the ground and all that kind of stuff?
Maybe.
300 points is certainly a points denial ticket there. Do I like him more than the Tree Herder? The Vicious is nice, but I, as my playstyle, like to try and keep my stuff alive. So the Radiance of Life is more for me, but 260 points, so that's a 40-point jump. It's not cheap.
Cloak of Death is better than Radiance of Life, though, generally speaking, because you don't always have something to heal. You know, like you can just keep chipping away damage with Cloak of Death as long as you're near something. Whereas if you're near something, it has to have damage on it to heal it, if you know what I mean.
If you're scouting in front, though, and you're assaulting the front line, you're generally surrounded by your units. So it is handy. But
I guess.
I just think that with this list, there's a lot of verdant options. That aura is great. Having both a Tree Herder and Wilt Daddy is great.
It's
a lot
real,
of points of something that they're not going to remove. Yeah.
Honestly, it's borderline broken. 260 plus 300 for those 2 units.
Yeah.
They're dash 18, dash 19, defense 6. He's verdant, right? So a fellow Tree Herder can heal him up. While he chips away wounds at things, the other guy's healing him. And if you've got him, of course, around some other tree-like units that are also similarly defensively difficult to remove, you just got this uber anvil that can grind really well. So, yeah, you get to move your figures in the middle of the table and just go, come at me, and say, this is going to be really fun games of Kings of War. We're just going to roll heaps of dice. And
the thing with these guys is they are so hard to bloody kill unless you offer up a flank. Which you can protect with it, which you should be protecting with all the other units. These guys will grind down extremely well, particularly with, as I think it was Bensome said earlier, they do have access to heal as well. Yep. Healing defense 6 units with dash 18 or dash 19 is just crazy good. Add in that dash 19 with Cloak of Death and stuff is going down quicker than you're killing it. So It can be great. There is also, I forget which scenario it is, that you can give the tokens out. Your tree herder is amazing at holding all of your tokens because it's just so hard to take off in one turn, or even 2 turns, or 3 turns.
Also note that while he has Surge, he's not a spellcaster, so he can't be hexed. And another really good thing about it is the base size, because it's only a monster, not a titan, so it's nice and small.
Only a 50 mil.
The thing that annoys me about these kind of like really high defense, really high nerve units is that it kind of invalidates certain army types. Like, I get that it's okay to have really tough units, and I think one tree herder or just the Wilt Daddy even, or whatever, is fine. But when you take like tree herder and Wilt Daddy and a couple of hordes of forest shamblers or something, you're in a spot where if your opponent's taking like a normal list, so many of their units are effectively redundant against you, like things that don't have any crushing at all. They just do nothing. Like, they just do nothing against you at that point. If they've got no crushing, if they're like a spearman kind of unit or whatever. And if you're, heaven forbid, your opponents use an army, which quite a few armies, like, they're kind of forced into this kind of playstyle, but they sort of rely mainly on kind of crushing one, lots of attacks, that kind of a playstyle. You're just going to outgrind them almost no matter what they do. They need to sort of flank and surround you and outplay the crap out of you to even have much of a chance. Whereas the alternative of, like, if you play an army that has heaps of crushing 2 and 3 units that are like, I don't know, more like if they've got 4 units of Stormwind Cavalry
Bissell
or
Dwarves,
something.
for example.
Or Bissell Dwarves that just auto-wound everything, and those kinds of armies. They can wipe through your tree herders or your Wilt Daddies and sort of make the unit look not very good. Then your unit's not very good. It's too much of, like, it makes it too rock paper scissorsy for my liking.
Yeah.
I don't like that kind of thing.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll say about that sort of double tree list, I've run it in the elf list before, is that it's a massive point sink, and the rest of this list, more so the elf list than this one, but it does start to consume a lot, and when you take a few units down through the natural attrition of the army, you're left with very few remaining to actually play the objectives.
Yeah, like, there are a lot of points, and so they should be. So it's not like like it's unbeatable. I'm not saying it's sort of overpowered in that sense. It's just similar. It's a similar problem to making like a hardcore gunline army, where just every single unit in your army has a ranged weapon. You know, like when you have that kind of extreme, you create this rock paper scissors effect that makes rank and flank army games just less fun.
Yep.
What about the Elven King, Huw?
The Elven King, the king amongst the pointy-eared gits. He has speed 6, melee 3, and defense 5. 1 unit, so I see him as like a knight kind of king. He's probably got a heap of armor on and stuff like that. He's probably into storms, breezes, maybe even winds, all that kind of thing. Anything that's kind of a little bit oxygen related, he's pretty keen on. His unit size 1, unit strength 0. Attacks 5, okay, medium. 13/15 nerve and 100 points. So crushing strength 1, elite melee, individual, inspiring, and mighty. So
He's a mighty.
He's your expensive fighting character kind of guy, but he's very reliable. He's 5 attacks, 3s to hit. He can also take a Shard Bane, which is a unique item, which increases
Not a
his
Shard
melee
Bane,
to-
the Shard Bane.
Sorry, the Shard Bane.
Isn't it a Shard Blade?
Shard Blade. Yes, it is.
Shard
The
Blade.
Shard
Wow.
Blade.
I really mishandled that one, didn't I?
Bane
Yeah.
of Shards, yeah.
So the Shard Blade, so there's 1 Shard Blade around, but for some reason every Elven King has one. I don't know how that happened, but so it's a unique item that you can take to increase their melee to 2+ for 15 points, which is 20 points cheaper than increasing your melee to 2+ normally would be. So that's not too shabby. I mean, he's only got 5 attacks still, but when you're melee 2+ with elite and crush 1, you know, even though you've only got 5 attacks, you're really putting out like that 3 or 4 damage very, very frequently. Like, you're just very reliable, which is really cool. He can also be mounted on a horse, which boosts him up to speed 9 for 35 points. I like how much they've increased the horse points in this edition. It feels more
Expensive.
It feels more right, because it is an expensive upgrade, but it does feel worth it most of the time on this particular guy, I reckon.
Especially with the individual, he just kind of, you go where you want and get in the way.
Yeah, you want to get that inspiring where you want and that reliable damage where you want. And then in a pinch, you can chuck yourself in front of something. You're mighty, so they can't go through you even if they kill you. And you've got nerve 15 and defense 5, so you're very likely to hold something up. He's just a solid all-round guy.
So that all-rounder, so this guy can hunt on a horse, obviously. He can hunt war machines really successfully with the Shard Blade, hitting on 2s. 15 attacks. Really, really reliable. He can also chase down individuals. He can block. He can add on wounds. Really, really handy character to have. Something that I would almost always take in.
So with the Shard Blade, you're calling it Shardbane too, by the way.
It doesn't matter. We're going with Shardbane
With
now.
the Shard Blade and a horse, he's up to 150, so it's half again the price. That's with no magic item.
He's not as good as the standard Elf King because the one in the Elf list gets the Sabertooth Hunting Cat, which gives him Duelist, which makes him a lot better against
For 10
individuals.
points. So he's more expensive, that Elf guy.
Yeah.
10 points is pretty good for Duelist, though.
Yeah.
Can you
No,
give
it's
him the
great.
Shard
Yeah,
Blade?
fantastic.
Or does the Shard Blade count as his magic item?
Nope.
It doesn't, does
No,
it?
no, it
So you
doesn't.
could give him
Upgrade.
the Mournful Blade, which is 20, I think.
And it's
15.
Shardbane.
It's Shardbane and Mournful Bane.
Mournful Blade.
Mournful Blade. Double the blades.
So you could give him 2 swords and he could just really pack some heat. And then he's just
Yeah.
the same as the
Yeah,
regular elf one, but 10 points more, is he? But
5 points
5
more,
points?
yeah.
Okay, who cares at that point? Whatever. Yeah, he's a gangster. He does everything.
Wish I had him, but I don't. So let's go to the one that is next in line,
It's his son.
the Elven Prince. So basically the same thing, except the attacks are 3, the nerves 11, 13, and only 55 points. Still crushing 1, still elite in melee, and is an individual, but he hasn't proven himself, so he's not inspiring. And he's not mighty. He's
Yeah.
a bit of a weakling. But you can give him a subpar horse, which is still speed 9, for 25 points instead of 30. Nah, take a king.
Yeah, you can give this guy inspiring, but what's the point? He just really doesn't quite have a role. With only 3 attacks,
He goes from a guy that's kind of all-rounder, reasonably good at everything, to a guy that's all-rounder, reasonably bad at everything. So he doesn't do a reliable 1 damage anymore. He could easily fluff his attacks and not even disrupt something. If it's got, if they've got a flyer or something like that, so he doesn't do reliable, meaningful, constant damage in the way that the king does. He doesn't hold up a unit because he's not mighty. He's only 11, 13 nerves, so he could hold up a unit, but if they break him, they're going to go through him just like any other individual and keep fighting. And he doesn't inspire, which is, of course, the main thing the king's doing when he's not hitting things with his sword.
I mean, he's okay at grounding things, hitting on 3s with elite, and then crush 1, so he might be able to get 1 damage just to halt it or to stop a spell.
Believe me, it seems like melee 3 attacks, crush 1 will ground something at all times, but right when you bloody well need it to. A White King's got exactly the same stat line. Admittedly, doesn't have elite, but still, several times needed a White King to ground a fucking dragon or something. Oh no, I said it. You have to bleep that out. Ground a nasty dragon, and he just fluffs it every time. What a
I
bugger.
suppose you can give him one of the 5-point items to reroll one of the damage or hit dice
Yeah.
yeah.
for
That's
that purpose,
fine.
but I don't see him in any other role.
Yeah, it's a tough sell, the Elven
You
Prince.
could give him the Inspiring Talisman and just take him as a budget king, in which case he's actually quite similar to the next entry, but just a few more points.
I'll tell you what's the massive disrespect though. The Elven Prince and the Army Standard Bearer, they're not as expensive. So the Army Standard Bearer, so that comes in at also speed 6, melee 4, no ranged attack, defense 4, no unit strength, 1 attack, 10, 12 nerve for 60 points, so 5 more points than the Elven Prince. I'm sure he's letting him know about it. He, however, is inspiring, unlike the Prince. Also has melee, elite for his melee with his 1 attack, and is also individual. Also has a subpar horse for 25 points.
Yeah.
We say subpar, it's the same thing. We're just because it's cheaper, so it's
Yeah.
like bargain basement
It is.
horses when it
Yeah,
comes
it's
to the
just,
elves.
it's just like it's a sprightly filly instead of like a hardcore thoroughbred Thundermere
Yeah.
or something.
I personally love this guy with the loot, just to sit behind a whole heap of the units that you've got, just to add in that extra crushing strength that's really helpful in this list.
Yeah, and that's probably a more impactful piece on the tabletop than a king that can dish out a wound or whatever. Like, sorry, not a king, a prince.
The prince,
So,
yeah.
so the prince that's, for 5 points less, sure, you get a nerve, you get a couple of attacks, you get a crushing.
It's inspiring. It's worth a hell of a lot more than 5
That's
points.
right, exactly. It's just not enough to compensate for the inspiring. And the other thing is, Inspiring Talisman is a thing you're very likely to use in an elf list. So you probably don't want to chuck it on a prince. Yeah, you're right. The prince ends up having no role between the standard bearer and the king. The prince is just waiting for the king to die so he can be a king.
Yeah,
That's really
exactly.
always good fun.
Take his horse. All right. Tell us about the spellcast, you.
So your Elven Archmage. I don't know why all the mages and also the wraiths like to hang around archways so much, but the Elven Archmage, all the regular mages couldn't make it to the battle. So there's only the Archmage that's available. He is a Speed 6, Melee 5, Defense 4, Range Dash guy. Unit Strength 0, of course. 1 measly Magey attack. 11 and 13 Nerve, which is the same as the Prince, but higher than the Standard Bearer guy there. 60 points he is. What a bargain. Individual, he is the Master of Magic because, again, no regular mages were available, so they could only hire the Master at this particular instance.
So just before we continue, he's get no built-in spells, so you have to pay for your spells.
He's the first mage entry I've come across which doesn't have a spell off the bat. So it's like, you don't even have to buy him one, right? So he could just be like a mage that dabbles in cantrips. He just like hangs out on the battlefield and like, he can like light candles. Yeah, he can like, if someone farts, he can like decrease the potency of the methane on the air with like razzle dazzle, and that's about all he can achieve. But you could also give him Bane Chant for 20 points. Or Lightning Bolt for 5 for 35 points. It's a beefy old Lightning Bolt.
That's solid, yep.
Same as a Ratkin one, but a few more points, no big deal. You could mount him on a horse. He only has a regular filly available, doesn't have the same sparkle in its eye that's available to the King's horse, of course, but still, speed 9. You can give him a Wind Blast 6 for 25 points, which is, of course, the most OP option that you'll see regularly on the tabletop. He has Heal 4 for 30 points. He's got Hex 3 if you're really feeling like a power gamer and you really just don't like spending points on things that matter. And Mind Fog 2 for 15 points, which is an interesting little option. I feel like maybe, I don't really know why you take that either. So he's got heaps of options. Most of them are not very good, but he has a couple of really good options. So yeah, you can probably almost ignore everything past the horse entry there, but I think he's a really cool unit. You can give him so many things.
Spellcaster 2, so he can be hexed.
He could be hexed. That's correct. That's correct.
And I think we should also explain what Master of Magic is. It's basically elite for Bane Chant, Heal, Hex, and Lightning Bolt, and Mind Fog, and Wind Blast. So just all the spells that he can take, he can get elite.
Which is great.
So let's have a realistic chat about the Archmage here. So Lightning Bolt with the boomstick, Lightning Bolt 8 with elite, effectively. Gold. Your second one, take Lightning Bolt 5, and depending upon how you're going with Inspiring, you either give him Inspiring, so he has two rolls, or you give him Conjurer's Staff, so we can reroll one of them. Your alternate one, depending on the playstyle and the build of your list, is that you go the heal option. So you put on some heal, and then you put on the Shroud of the Saint, and so you go up to heal 6, rerolling 1s. Really, really good at keeping your big trees alive. Great units. I don't build an elf list without 2 of these, and I think that's largely across most of the elf lists that I've seen as well.
So you can take the kind of la la la, praise the woods, gardeners, green thumb kind of characters, or you can be the like unlimited power kind of guys.
That's the one.
Making the Palpatine or the Padme.
Yeah. Bane Chant can't be farted out either. I mean, excuse me.
Yeah, that's
it can't
true.
be on account of the Archmage's other cantrip skills, but also because Bane Chant's good. 20 points to Bane Chant 2, usually a lot worse than Bane Chant 3 because 50% chance of failure versus a 1 in 9 chance of failure, whatever percentage that is a huge difference. But Elite does boost that up a little bit, so slightly more likely to not just fluff it. When I said 50%, I apologise. It's 1 in 4, isn't it, of failing when you've got Bane Chant 2?
Yeah.
So Elite does boost that up a bit, so you don't just get that really critical turn where you charge in with your big scary unit and then you just fluff your Bane Chant.
Yeah. But otherwise, I think, Sellick, you've just said everything that needs to be said. Yeah.
So don't just take every single skill on the mage and just take like the ultimate archmage that knows his way around every mage college about the place, because
you're not going to use all of them. Just give it a solid roll.
Max 2, I would say.
Yep. Okay, next is the Dragon Kindred Lord. So I think this is our first Titan. Well, there you go. So Hero Titan, speed 10, melee 3, ranged 4, defense 5. He's got his unit strength because he's Titanic. 10 attacks, 17, 19 nerve for 315 points. Strength 3. He's elite with his melee only. He flies, inspires. He has nimble and has dragon breath, which is just a 12-inch attack with steady aim, so no piercing on that. Minus 10 attacks on ranged. He's a solid dragon. Pretty standard stuff there.
Dragons have been nerfed ever since Kings of War have come out, pretty much. They've just got gradually nerfed in the general rules here and there and everywhere, and they're still great. They're still a great unit. They still fly, they still kick ass, they're still super reliable, they still inspire, they still shoot when you can't charge anything. They're just awesome.
Yep. So anything that's big and beefy that has some good attacks that can fly and is nimble is solid. It's hard to kind of go wrong with this. Just don't fang him out forward so he can get flanked and you'll be right, really.
Yeah, I think he does exactly what's on the box. So he's all about getting your opponent to think and sweat, I guess, because as you've said, Bensome, you're not going to throw him out pretty much in the first 2 turns. It's going to be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 that he's really getting out there, and it's just making sure that you're using that dragon breath as much as you can in those first 2 turns if required to sort of take out some chaff, or as long as you're doing it in a safe way. You obviously want to hide him in deployment from all of your big beefy war machines as well, because that 17-19, as well as a giant big dragon on the tabletop, will actually be a threat. You do have to protect him a little bit in those first couple of turns before you can really dive him into the ice cream.
Yeah, and I think he can't take out units by himself in one round either, because it's only 10 attacks, and while he will do a good number, it'll be a risky nerve roll to take it off, so...
That's right.
Either charge softened things or lower nerve, really.
As far as big, beefy, flying dragons, demons, and those kinds of things are concerned, the thing that sets the elven ones apart is that they've got elite, and that does just make them significantly more reliable, because I don't know how many times I've charged in with like a 10 attack monster, that's especially the ones that are melee 4, but even the ones that are melee 3, sometimes you just whiff. You're like, all right, I need like 6 or 7 wounds to break this thing or something, and it's very likely that you would just fluff your dice in that kind of circumstance. And Dragon Lord's just even more reliable than any other Dragon Lord in this particular instance, because he's got that elite. It really matters.
So it's a solid choice, a lot of points, but it's hard to go wrong if you're like flying monsters, really.
Yeah, no, it's always handy to have in your list, particularly in the larger point games where you need a nutcracker. But we'll jump into the first of the, unique sort of units, which is the Avatar of the Green Lady. So she's had a couple of tweaks along the ways, but she still flies, so she's still speed 10, melee 5, no range attack, defense 5, got no unit strength still, has the singular 1 attack with a nerve now of 13-15 and 150 points. Now she's got balance, fly, individual, inspiring, pathfinder, regeneration 5+. She's got heal 6 as well. What do we think?
Depending on the list, I think she's pretty good. I don't think she'll be dying in her games just because defense 5, speed 10, so you can get around the place, and regen 5. Pathfinder means you can hide in forests, and healing up all your big trees with that heal 6.
It's not usually hard to keep individual speedy characters alive in the first place, but with the regen and the D5, I agree. She's not dying unless you fluff it.
And it's not a massive points investment for that at 150. I probably wouldn't go any higher than that, otherwise it would just be too much, but because all she does is heal, because she doesn't fight. But the balance is okay, because if I remember correctly, that's either Radiance of Life or Cloak of Death. You get to choose that each turn.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
Cool.
So if you can maybe fly around the back of an army, heal if they're in the fight, because it's only 12-inch range, and then also be dealing damage with Cloak of Death, so double roll there.
As is often the case with healing kind of units, if you've got like a critical massive heal, it's so good. It's like they charge your nasty anvil unit and do 8 wounds and don't quite break it, and then you just heal it all back. Like, that's super demoralizing. That's like the Empire of Dust experience. So the Avatar of the Green Lady, I think if you've got an Archmage cruising around with healing as well, and maybe a Inspiring Talisman or something like that, and like healing is like your thing, I think she's fabulous. By herself, just cruising about, not dying and healing 6 every turn, it might not be enough value for your 150 points. It depends on the game a little bit, but you want tough units and you want other healers around. I think that's when she'll really shine. If you're just doing like speedy elf shooty stuff or whatever, where like if your unit gets charged, it's going to die anyway, she's not going to be that effective in that kind of army.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty much the grind list that you want her in. So that's where you've got your trees that are giving Radiance of Life, the Green Lady that's giving Radiance of Life and a heal.
This big Death Star of inspired, unkillable nonsense. Also, I thought Avatar was a blue lady.
No, that's the sequel. The Green Lady's the sequel.
Ah, right, cool.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Hugh, what's next?
Elric Nizleen. Nizleen? Yes. Elric. Elric is a fabulous hero spellcaster. Speed 7, so particularly swift for an elf. Melee 2, and defense 5, range dash. So awesome stats. Unit strength nothing, 6 attacks, dash 14, bold as brass. Is old Elric, and 160 points. So very pricey. Let's hope he's got some good abilities. Crushing strength 1. Elite melee, nice. So he basically never misses because he's 2+ with elite. Awesome. Crush 1, individual, inspiring, mighty, pathfinder, and wayfire. And then he's also got a cheeky fireball 8. So he's a elf king, basically, but he sneaks in there with the extra attack. He effectively has the Shard Bane for free because he's got melee too. So he's sort of like quite comparable to the Elven King in quite a lot of ways, but his stats are just a little bit juicier. And then he's got that fireball.
Yeah, and the Wayfire rule means that fireball applies shattering.
They could have just had Fireball 8 in brackets shattering.
Yeah, or just like Fireball 10 and just basically the same thing as shattering anyway.
He's a fair bit more expensive than the King, though.
Yeah, 160 points. But by the time you got to give the King the Shard Blade.
So I guess the King with Fireball 8 for 10 points is probably not as bad.
Diadem of Dragonkind's 30. So you give him the Diadem and the Shard Blade, he's 145. And that's pretty much equivalent. So what you're getting there is you're getting dash 14 nerve, which is a weird nerve because the regular Elven King is 13, 15. So he's actually got a high end, but a lower. He can't get wavered, which is a bit weird. So 15 points you're getting an attack and a speed. And that's about it, really. I guess you're getting also the shattering on the fireball. So if for some reason you wanted to take an Elven King with a Shard Blade and the Diadem of Dragonkind, probably worth an extra cheeky few points to take Elric. But if you're going to take a good Elven King with the good stuff, then like the good old sparkly pony, yeah, just do that. It's 150 points. It's 10 points less. It's better. Sure, you're going to get a fireball, but it's just more maneuverable. It's better.
Yep. Okay, so we'll just go to the last entry, finally, the last hero, Nimue Waydancer. So, speed 6, melee 5, no range, defense 4, 1 attack, 12-14 on the nerve, 150 points, and she has Cloak of Death, individual, inspiring for verdant only, stealthy, and has Wanderer of the Ways. And she's got a bunch of spells. Fireball 10, Heal 4, Surge 4, and Wind Blast 5. And she is also verdant, so she can make use of the Wilt Daddy's Vicious Aura. And Wanderer of the Ways special, so before you give it an order, you can increase her speed to 10 and give her fly as well for that turn.
She can also cast at the double, yeah.
Yes, that is a big thing. So you can go 20 and still cast spells for that turn.
Well, it's actually, I love this sort of thing. So you know how it's very, it's very unlike other units to be able to get in positions to wind blast correctly. This is the one thing that you could actually wind blast something closer or push it, get behind them, fly behind the unit, push them towards your front line, then surge them in. So you could actually play some shenanigans there. Alternatively, as a really defensive move, you could pop over and do your heal. Well, it's probably only heal 4, so it's not that big of a deal. Fireball 10, that's another option that you could chip away some wounds at one of those mages that's just in a back line with really low nerve.
I guess the only problem with zipping off and doing that tricksy move is the next turn she's speed 6 again and out of place.
She's still a speed 6 individual though. Like she's pretty hard to to catch.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to position her poorly, I think, for her to be in a spot where she can't then just run out
I
the way.
think so as well.
I think she's cool. I think actually comparing it, I didn't do this when I first looked over the list, but now that you guys are talking about her, comparing old Animue with the Windborn, I feel like the Windborn also do, because what you said, Sellick, where she like gets in position and then wind blast something. That's kind of all the Windborn do for 15 extra points. And yeah, they wind blast a bit more reliably and do it every turn, I guess. But if you want to wind blast something, she does that. But then she does heaps of other stuff too. She also heals surges,
Turn 3-4, where everything's really engaged, and then you use the Wanderer of the Ways and just fly up and get your Cloak of Death in the perfect position where she can't be charged in the following turn. Does a fireball or a surge or a heal or whatever. She can actually put out a lot of damage with that aura just from being in the right position at the right time.
Hard pick for me, though.
She's awesome. I love her. I wish I'd taken her on my list. I didn't, but I wish I did now. She's got she's got the old Cloak of D as well. She just gets in there and she flaps her big old D around and goes, come at me. I'm going to wind blast that. I'm going to heal that. I'm going to surge that, move that over there. I'm going to fireball that. There's so much cool stuff.
I'm a little bit with Bensome here.
It's nice, but I can't, All right, what we might do is we'll take a final break, and when we come back, we'll just chat allies and lists.
The nobility of the Fae, if they can be considered as such, do not take the title of queen, prince, or king, as would their more arrogant cousins. Instead, they consider it is their ultimate duty to guard the forests and the pathways that crisscross Panathor, and as such, adopt titles such as Custodian of the Ways. Rarely, one of these champions will stir a mighty barkworm from its slumber, a sight to rival the famous dragon lords of Alandor.
Okay, this home stretch, allies.
I don't think it needs it, but if you were going to take something, it would be because this is, I think it's a neutral army, so you could take something from, say, throw out some hypotheticals here, some undead or abyssal dwarfs to get some extra crushing strength, which is, well, as I've said about 600 times, it's where the weakness is.
It's got a bit of everything though, other than like it. It's not. I don't even think that's really where the weakness is in a way. I mean, it can be, depends on the list, of course, but you can take a bunch of grindy, kind of super tough, bashy units in the form of the tree friendos, or you can take really fast, high-impact units. You can take a really shooty army. You can take a really maneuverable army. You can take pretty much everything. Cheap-ass, like, chaffy infantry that are... throwaway is, I think, more the thing that the list lacks because, it's elves.
But then they got panthers. So...
Yeah, the panthers is like...
You could take a bunch of panthers, that's right. You don't even really need the cheap throwaway infantry, but if for some reason you were playing a scenario where you just needed a lot more cheap unit strength and you wanted all your speedy, sneaky elves to do that kind of stuff, maybe you'd ally in a bunch of regiments of, like, meathead goblins or something. But
just as objective callers. Yeah, I think they're pretty fine. I can't be bothered with allies.
Yeah,
not with this list anyway.
It's got a bit of everything. Yeah, you just don't need them.
All right, so let's get into lists. I think we settle on 1995 just to make things interesting. Because if you go on to 2300, you can take whatever. It doesn't really matter. So I
made a 2000 list because I couldn't take 5 points.
Well, I'll start off with my list first, which is a pretty standard tree list in my eyes. So we have 2 troops of Boss Wraiths, a regiment of Boss Wraiths, a horde of Forest Guard, a regiment of Gladestalkers, 3 hordes of Forest Shamblers, just a troop of Panthers, and then we've got the Wiltfather, mainly for the Cloak of Death, not Cloak of Death, the Aura on Verdant, and an Elven Archmage with Inspiring, Banechant, Lightning, and a Horse. So the point there is to make use of Vicious, because just about everything is Verdant apart from the Forest Guard and Gladestalkers, but the Archmage can Banechant whatever it wants because of the fast horse and the lightning bolt. I felt like I needed some sort of range damage just to finish off weakened foes, and the Gladestalkers are there to sit up the back and hold quarters, an objective or whatever.
Yeah. What unit strength is that?
22.
11
with the 11 units.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah.
That's pretty solid.
It's a solid list, so that's really just going and embracing that aura, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I just think
And
the
it's-
race with Vicious and Shamblers, as well as the backup of Bane Chant, should be fairly punchy.
Well,
I think the race and the Shamblers are like cool to play together in a way because the Shamblers are like these solid anvil-y slow units and the race are these kind of speedy, damagey units, so it would be a bit more dynamic to play than just like a mad tree Death Star, which is one way that you can play it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh,
And there's a lot of dry brushing in that army, which I like about it.
Easy to...
did you have any items at all?
apart from the Inspiring Talisman, no.
Interesting. So I guess for my 1995 list, I started off with some tall spears, just a regiment of those. I went with the Horde of Forest Guard with the Brewer's Strength. 2 regiments of archers, one of those with fire oil because I had the extra 5 points. The Forest Shamblers, I went 1 regiment and 2 hordes, all vanilla. 2 troops of Gur Panthers just for chaff. The Wilt Daddy, naturally, he came in. And then I went with the Army Standard Bearer with the loot and 2 Archmages, one with the Boomstick, so Lightning Bolt 8 effectively, and the other one with Inspiring Talisman and Bane Chant 2.
So your standard mage setup there.
Yeah, I didn't go Lightning Bolt 5 on the second one, just purely on the points, and I just wanted him to be just that inspiring source.
So he's like an expensive loot. His expensive version of the Standard Bearer
Yeah,
with the loot,
that's
right?
right.
Because he's exactly the same.
Yeah,
It's just
and I couldn't
Inspiring
have 2
Talisman and
Army Standard Bearers with loots, so yeah.
of course, yeah. So you like that? Actually, what is the difference in points between those two? Right. So you got Army
15,
Standard
I
with
think.
loot is okay. So they're fairly close. Interesting. Yeah, well, I guess you can very reliably get those spears or, any other unit, I guess, for that matter. Just get that Bane Charm on them and get them hitting a bit harder.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So I think just particularly with tall spears and the Forest Shamblers, they need more crushing. So they just struggle to get through anything. The Forest Guard on the charge at Crushing Strength 2 or Thunderous 1, Crushing 1, they're okay. But the Shamblers struggle to grind through Defense 5, 6.
Mm-hmm. Is it fair to say that both your armies are kind of they're not slow exactly, but they take the charge, recover, countercharge, and hit really hard on the countercharge kind of armies?
Yep. Scout sort of changes that a little bit. But yeah, I think the way to play it is obviously scouting up your Shamblers, you get your Wild Panthers to be either going straight through to avoid that first charge or to set up the only one charge that you may want, and then countercharge after the Panthers are dead, sort of thing. So I think that's sort
Makes
of
sense.
the play style I was going for.
Cool. But if they have like a bunch of flies and cavalry and stuff like and shooting, then they're going to kill your Panthers, and then you're still going to be in a similar spot where you take the
That's
charge
right,
and
yeah.
countercharge.
And you should be able to
But,
take it with a
doesn't
lot
mean-
of fear.
Doesn't mean you're going to do bad. Yeah. No, you got tough stuff for sure. That's cool. So for an Elven army, I'd say both your armies are, quite different to what maybe we think of as elves, or maybe what I think of as elves. Maybe it's not what we all
Well,
think.
it's Sylvan.
But
so
yeah,
trees.
counterpunch kind of guys. So my Sylvan. So where's the word Sylvan come from? What does that mean? It's not something that Mantic made up.
It's sort
is
of
it?
like
It's something, does it
golden, but
mean-
not as good.
Right, gotcha. I thought it meant something foresty. Anyway, so I have a Horde of Forest Guard as well. They don't have an item, wish they did, but here we are. We've got a River Guard Tree Leapers because I'm an elite gamer. I've got a regiment of those guys. Love that unit. I feel like they're, for some reason, the main pull to me, this whole army for me. I want those little froggy boys. Kindred Gladestalkers, I have a troop of them. I've got a Kindred Archers regiment to chill on backward objectives and such. And then I've gone Windborn, Trooper Windborn to go send windy arrows your way. I've got 2 regiments of Silver Breeze Cavalry. I've got a Stormwind Cavalry unit with Jesse's boots. Even though I said Caterpillar was bolted on, I was 5 points short. So here we are again. I've got an Elven Archmage, similar to Bensome's one, that's got Inspiring Talisman, Lightning Bolt, Horse, and Wind Blast instead of Bane Chant. We're getting blasty in this place.
Didn't realise this was a power list.
And then last but not least, I've got a Dragon Lord with a Brew of Sharpness. So he's a 350-point mofo that auto hits and, deals out 10, crushing 3 McDougals. So this army is quite different to your 2 armies, which I like. I like that we went down these
It's very
different paths.
windswept.
It's not perhaps quite as powerful, maybe, I don't know, but I think it's not bad. Like you've got a really punchy horde in the Forest Guard. You got You got Wind Blast 13 in total, which does a little bit of damage. So, and it's got quite a bit of shooting across the army. It's got 5 shooting units, so it likes to maneuver and be a cheeky elf and just keep doing the fire and flees. This is meant to be like a fire and flee style of army. And then once you get close, after you've been peppered with elves, and every time you like think you're cool units in charge range, it's wind blast your ass out of there. Then right when you're in trouble, the frogs jump in and the frogs are like, what? And you got to charge the frogs. And then, then you're in trouble because all of a sudden you're being countercharged by a Dragon Lord and a unit of Stormwind Cavalry. So I think it's actually not a terrible list, but it's very focused around... It's not a gun line.
For elite gamers only.
It's elite gamers only, that's correct. Yeah. It's full maneuver. It's maneuver and shoot and pepper. Yeah, it's Mongolian. It's fabulous.
And just to answer your question, Sylvan is actually a word, and it means consisting of or associated with woods.
That's right.
Wood.
And it's from medieval Latin. There you go. Which is Sylvanus.
There you go. That makes a lot of sense.
Write that down, listeners.
Glad we learnt that. Glad we learnt here today.
I think that's it.
So yeah, Sylvan Kin.
Not bad.
Pretty
Very
cool.
difficult list to write because of the amount of heroes there are. The entire list, half of it is heroes.
Yeah, and all three of us only had like a couple of heroes in our list. I think you had the most, Sellick, at 3.
Yeah,
was
3
it?
or 4, wasn't it? So I had...
We all took a fatty.
Wilt Daddy, naturally, was in there. The Army Standard Bearer and 2 Archmages, so 4. Yeah.
But you can rely on Sellick to take
Yeah.
like lots and lots of magic items. Well, as
I think
Bensome
even
and
in
I
this
had,
list,
I think 3
magic
between us.
items I took 4, 5. Yeah.
That's conservative for you.
Yeah, it is conservative for me.
Yeah. They're cool units. It's because so many of them have Pathfinder and stuff already, right? So you don't need to bolt anything on.
All right, I think we've gone on long enough. Let us know if you think we are wrong. I doubt it. I think you'll agree with us wholeheartedly.
Yes.
But otherwise, thanks for listening. It's good to actually get back in recording again, I think.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Lovely to talk to you all. Don't take anything I said to heart because I don't know what I'm talking about. But yeah. Wind Blast and Nimue the Way Dancer.
Get on it.
That's your way to victory, you guys.
Meta. All right, thanks, guys. We'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, guys.
Although the beings of the forests tend not to take interest in the affairs of mortals, a few beings are affected by the continual destruction of the green places of the world. The forests bring life to the world, and they can also bring death. The most powerful of these beings is the ancient tree herder known as the Wiltfather. All beings are doomed to die, and it is the Wiltfather who brings this fate to them, draining the life force of all in their presence. While some may see them as a cruel being who strides alongside the forces of the Green Lady, in truth, they are a kind soul. To the Wiltfather, life is a struggle and death is the release.
Thank you for tuning in with my team. Make sure you follow on Facebook and Twitter. Yes, indeed, more than a game, it's a lifestyle. Yes, sir. Hope you realize that the math hammer doesn't work. We give the people what they desire. Australian Wargaming Podcast, direct Misfire. You don't want to miss a thing. Yeah, we got plenty more. If you're ready, let's go. Stay tuned, that's for sure. Hey.